So where are you really from?
No, that question embodies the perpetual foreigner stereotype so much.
This episode was filmed before we received the news about George Floyd. The murder of George Floyd is absolutely tragic, and may he rest in peace and in power. Systemic racism plagues our country. We must acknowledge it and speak up. We cannot sit on the sidelines as these racial injustices continue on. White supremacy culture is defined by showing up for racial justice as the idea that white people and the ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions of white people are superior to people of color and their ideas, thoughts, beliefs, and actions.
More familiar examples of white supremacy include the KKK, the use of the N-word, hate crimes, and lynching. White supremacy has evolved to include mass incarceration, racial profiling, denial of white privilege, model minority myth, and claiming reverse racism, as all of these oppress people of color and deny underlying issues in America.
As we've seen with the discrimination against Asian Americans with the COVID-19 pandemic, white supremacy is continuing to scar the AAPI community. However, we must acknowledge that although we do not have white privilege, we do not face the same discrimination as the African American community. But our communities are intertwined by the same overarching issue that we face, white supremacy. It is in the interest of our community, other minority communities, and all peoples to support racial justice for each other, especially African Americans.
In 1968, African American, Latinx, Asian American students, along with allies, banded together to create the Third World Liberation Front as they carried out a 5-month strike at San Francisco State and UC Berkeley. They demanded equality for minorities in higher education and for classes that taught the history of people of color and would eventually reshape higher education. We must also acknowledge that many of the rights we have today can be credited to African American activists.
Many of you may be aware that among the officers arresting George Floyd, one of them was Asian American. He, along with other officers at the scene, stood by while George Floyd was being murdered. This is a reminder that we must confront anti-Black sentiments not only in America as a whole, but in the Asian American community too.
Now more than ever is the time to take a stand and demand for justice. You can take action by supporting one of the numerous organizations fighting for the cause.
Just some of them are the American Civil Liberties Union, Fair Fight, the Minnesota Freedom Fund, and Dream Defenders. You can also do your part by voting every primary and general election every year.
We as AAPIs must stand together with the Black community as we have in the past to end white supremacy. The topic of this episode is the perpetual foreigner stereotype and is an aspect of white supremacy. Welcome to the SituAsian Room, a journey into Asian America. This is episode 1, the pilot, and we'll be discussing perpetual foreigners. My name is Zach. I'm a third-generation Chinese American, currently based in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, and a undergrad student at the University of Miami studying business.
And I am your second host. My name is Emilie Villaverde. I am currently based in my hometown of Marlboro, New Jersey. I am Filipino American, and I am currently studying communications and psychology also at the University of Miami.
Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group and segment of eligible voters. Between 2000 and 2020, AAPIs, or Asian American Pacific Islanders, grew at a rate of 139%, according to Pew. The Asian American Pacific Islander community is so diverse, with the census recognizing over 20 different subgroups. And side note, if your family hasn't filled out the census, make sure to do it. When talking about people of color and race in America, the national conversation typically revolves around African Americans and the Latinx community. And sometimes Asian Americans are barely an afterthought. Despite having a smaller population than other minority communities, APIs have played an integral part in both American society and culture, even if the way we talk about race and how APIs are represented does not reflect it.
So yeah, that's why we pretty much started this podcast. So the mission of the SituAsian Room is to create a medium that explores the different issues inside the AAPI community and really bring awareness and education of these different topics and the different cultures that make this community so diverse to both those inside this community and to those on the outside that, just want to tap in a little more and really broaden their horizons.
Yes, and so the reason we named the podcast the SituAsian Room is a play on the White House Situation Room. The Situation Room is a series of conference rooms in the White House where, the president and their cabinet usually make decisions based on, big situations and problems. So we want to talk about the problems and issues in the AAPI community here in the SituAsian Room.
Yeah, and just a disclaimer, Zach and I are just students. We're not experts, so along the way we are going to be making mistakes. There are so many different issues in the AAPI community, and we really do hope to explore these issues in a greater depth with our audience and our listeners. And we want to turn this into an open dialogue. So this is not only an experience for you guys, but this is also an experience for Zach and myself.
Yes, and so for the pilot episode, episode number 1, we are going to be talking about perpetual foreigners, or the perpetual foreigner stereotype. And that basically means that, a group in this context is going to be about Asian Americans, will always be seen as foreign, even in their own country. And so the first time I think I really heard the term perpetual foreigners wasn't until recently, where I was in college and there was an ad about Gary Locke. Gary Locke was a former governor of Washington and U.S. ambassador to China, and the ad is a Trump attack ad on former Vice President Joe Biden, painting Biden as soft on China as he shakes hands with former governor and U.S. ambassador Gary Locke in front of Chinese flags, painting Gary Locke as a Chinese official. This upset many Asian Americans and Democrats, as they called on it, as racist, because it characterizes Gary Locke as a Chinese national. And so in the commentary of that, it's really where I heard perpetual foreigners for the first time.
Yeah, honestly, for me, I think the first time I heard the term perpetual foreigner was last year. So I went to a conference for the East Coast Asian American Students Union, or ICASU. And we went into different workshops. And one of the workshops that I was sitting in discussed the idea of the perpetual foreigner stereotype in the academic setting. So I was sitting with a bunch of other AAPI students that shared their experiences about how, we're all in the same academic environment, but for some reason, Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are seen as different, or we're seen as that foreign student. And I think I've always known the definition of the perpetual foreigner, just because I've seen it on media and, on the news. But the thing is, I think I've also experienced it. I just couldn't find that term to match what was actually going on. So I think it wasn't until that one conference that I really did learn the term perpetual foreigner.
That's going to be a common theme, I feel, is having these feelings and emotions and not knowing the words to put them in this podcast. And I feel the exact same about perpetual foreigners as you do, Em. We
Mm-hmm.
have these experiences growing up where people have said certain things that we'll get to later, and we just never knew that they were called, the perpetual foreigner stereotype.
Yeah, and honestly, before we had cases of COVID-19 back in February in the United States, Chinatown businesses were also hurting.
The Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council collected 1,700 reports of racist incidents against AAPIs in the past 6 weeks, according to ABC. And, I've definitely seen all of the news and different stories just rack up. There was a guy in Texas. He was a dad, and his 6-year-old son and 2-year-old daughter, they were all stabbed because a man thought that they were Chinese and infecting people. And that's what makes the perpetual foreigner syndrome or stereotype so relevant to today.
Honestly, that's insane. I mean, I see it also on social media. I see it through Facebook and Instagram, just scrolling through my explore posts. And, even before the cases of coronavirus hit the United States back in February, Chinatowns around the United States were suffering. Businesses were, getting that negative impact, even though that the coronavirus hadn't yet settle in the United States, just because people thought that they were going to get exposed to COVID-19 from supporting these businesses. And, because of that, because more people are shying away from Asian businesses and less people are going to Chinatowns, a lot of businesses had to cut their staff. With the perpetual foreigner stereotype, I think this really ties into, the things that have been happening today. It really ties back into the story of Vincent Chin. Zach, I know you know a little bit about Vincent Chin, right?
Yeah. So in the context for like the late 70s, early 80s, you had the oil crisis where oil prices were super high, making gas prices really high. The American auto industry only really produced very large gas guzzling vehicles. And so the Japanese automakers saw a perfect opportunity because they made smaller, more fuel efficient vehicles to enter into the US market. And
Mhm.
they really ate up a lot of market share, which or really put the pressure on, GM, Chrysler, and Ford. And I think the two people who murdered Vincent Chin were laid off Chrysler employees.
Yeah, exactly. So Vincent Chin, this took place June of 1982 in Detroit, Michigan. Vincent Chin was a Chinese American man, and he went out to a club with a couple of his friends to celebrate his bachelor party right before his wedding. And they were minding their own business, and as they were walking out of the club, these two white men saw Vincent Chin outside the club, and they thought he was Japanese. And because of that pent up anger, and just during that time, there was such a hatred towards Japanese, like the Japanese people.
Yeah.
These two men beat Vincent Chin to death, which isn't like, I can't even imagine like just how this went down. But what really took me by surprise as I was reading this story was these two men were arrested and they went to trial, but the only punishments that they received were a fine of $3,000, but they didn't get any jail time.
Wow. Yeah. Some people say like you would have, there would have been a harsher punishment if you killed like a dog.
Oh, for
um,
sure.
than a Chinese American man, because they didn't care. Asian lives
Hmm.
don't mean anything then, and that's a big conversation today. Like how much is the cost of someone's life, especially in minority communities. But the Vincent Chin case, it's almost the same today. People are attacking Asian Americans because they think they're foreign and they're bringing some kind of greater threat. And so today you see, economic insecurity because we don't. A lot of people are laid off. We don't know,
Yeah.
when the economy will reopen and how things will get back going. Back then in the case of Vincent Chin, it's really about foreign competition uh, in the marketplace. Another important example in history, I think, to talk about would be the Japanese internment camps, or American concentration camps, as many refer to them. Here's a clip of former prisoner and actor George Takei.
Japanese internment camp, according to grammar, will lead you to think that they were run by the Japanese government. We were American citizens of Japanese ancestry, ordered by the President of the United States to be imprisoned in the United States, in our case, Arkansas, and guarded over by the U.S. military. They were American concentration camps for Americans of Japanese ancestry. We were in Japanese American internment camps, but the press always, for the last 75 years, have been referring to those camps as Japanese internment camps, and it drove me up the wall every time I hear it.
I think George Takei makes a great point. Webster's dictionary defines concentration camp, a place where large numbers of people, such as prisoners of war, political prisoners, refugees, or members of an ethnic or religious minority, are detained or confined under armed guard. And that's exactly what Japanese internment camps, or how we know them as Japanese internment camps, were.
Hmm.
About 120,000 Japanese Americans were imprisoned. 2/3 of them were native born. Lieutenant General John DeWitt was the commander of the Western Defense, and he said famously that a Jap's a Jap. The Japanese race is an enemy race. It makes no difference whether he is an American citizen. He is still a Japanese. That quote really embodies what the perpetual foreigner stereotype is, that no matter what, even if you were born in the United States, raised here, that you will always be considered foreign or a threat just because of your race. Those words.
That that bothers me so much, because part of the perpetual foreigner stereotype, the same thing that enabled these concentration camps, is the question, where are you really from?
Yeah, no, the question, where you're really from, really does embody the perpetual foreigner syndrome. And
So
that,
Zach, where are you really from?
yeah, I think it's like a unique part. Well, I know other communities get asked a lot, but it is a part of the Asian American experience being asked, where are you really from? In an effort for people to figure out, like, why aren't you white?
So how do you answer that, Zach?
I I usually answer just like Pennsylvania, or like Downingtown, Pennsylvania, 45 minutes
Okay.
west of Philly. And then they'll be like, where are your parents from? And you know what they're getting at, because they're just not satisfied with your answer. And they want to know.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, Queens. And they'll be like,
No.
where are your grandparents from? And I'll be like, you caught me. Fine. Southern China, you win. But that's something that's like, I know what you're asking. Sometimes I get offended by it. Other times people are just generally curious. They don't know how to ask. But I don't know. How about
Honestly,
you?
I really don't know how to answer sometimes, because I think I've gotten to the point where when people ask me where I'm from, I respond with, "Oh, well, I'm Filipino, but I was born and raised in the New York, New Jersey area." And while I don't have a problem saying that, but now that I'm thinking about it, is it me just trying to just try and defend a part of my identity? Because I know people are asking me where I'm, like, when they ask me where I'm really from, they're trying to get at what type of Asian am I?
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm just I'm answering yes, I'm Filipino, but wait, I'm from the United States. I'm from New Jersey. I'm from New York.
Yeah.
And it leads to this identity crisis, because I'm not ashamed to tell people that I'm Filipino, or that I was raised Filipino American. But it's just, I feel like I have to defend myself in a sense, because while I am not full American, I'm also that I have that Asian background. I like I feel like if I just say that I'm from New Jersey, I feel like I'm like, people don't believe me. Like, they're wanting more
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm going to disagree with it a little bit. Like, you are full American, you know, but like what people, accept as American. Because when we talk about race in America, it's often so binary. You're either black or you're white, and if you're
Hmm.
not, you're an immigrant or a foreigner. Foreigner does tend to have like a negative connotation, and that definitely should not
Hmm.
be the case. But in the context of, this conversation, people always think that we're not from here. We don't belong in the sense. So I always get mistaken as, like, I don't want to say exotic, but sometimes exotic. I feel like that's a term people use a lot to talk about women, and they shouldn't. But growing up, people always ask, like, where are you really from, or like, what language do you speak at home, or like, what do you eat at home? And I'll be like, English and pizza. I I don't like how binary we see it.
Yeah, I think that there is that sort of identity crisis, especially for the AAPI community, because it falls in that, like, seesaw kind of scenario where you're not Asian enough, but you're not American enough.
Yeah.
And you know, people in the AAPI community sometimes have that problem where they don't find a space where they belong, and it does occur, especially when we bring in some of the practices from our own different cultures into our day-to-day lives. So I know one experience that I've had with this seesaw bit was my first year at college. My freshman year, I was in the dining hall, and growing up in a Filipino American household, when we're eating, we normally use a spoon and a fork. And all of my Filipino people that are listening right now, you guys know the deal. You take the spoon, it's like a shovel, you push every piece of food with your fork onto the spoon, and that's how you eat. And the first time that happened, um, in the dining hall, people kind of looked at me and asked why I was doing that. And I just told people like, oh, I've been doing this my entire life. This is nothing, out of the ordinary. And one of the questions that I got was, oh, is that how people do it where you come from? And I remember like I kind of asked myself, is this racist or is this genuine curiosity? And I kind of just took this moment and I made the best of it. I was honest. I said, look, Filipinos, we eat with a spoon and fork or we eat with our hands. I really didn't think much of it. And then I just moved forward. But it's those experiences that like that one friend asked the question and it made me think, oh, is this like is what I'm doing not normal? When really like I just grew up my entire life thinking different things they are normal because it's part of my culture.
Yeah. I know. I definitely relate to the identity crisis and like trying to find where you fit in because I don't speak any Cantonese, which my parents and grandparents did. And I've never left the country, never left the country. So if I were to go to Hong Kong or southern China, I would stick out a lot. And every time I even go to Chinatown and I order food or go to pick up, they'll say something to me and I will not understand. And they'll give me that look of like disapproval, like, oh, like
Oh,
you
you
don't.
get the stare.
Yeah, yeah, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you get the stare and like the judgment and you feel them judging you because you
But
don't
the
know.
stare isn't on you, it's more on your parents because,
Yeah, but your parent, it's just right there that
the
moment.
older shop owners are looking at your parents like you didn't
Yeah,
teach your child Cantonese. Or it's like in my situation too, my parents like they'll look at my parents like, oh, she only speaks English, she doesn't speak Tagalog.
yeah,
What did you do? What didn't you do?
exactly. Yeah, but then like when we're amongst our peers and in like the regular, like you and I grew up in suburban white communities. Nobody
Hmm.
sees you as American. They're always like, as I said earlier, what do you language you speak at home, and where you really from, where were you born, and they don't believe that you're American.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So yeah, honestly, it winds down to the one question: what can we do about this? And this isn't just with our own experience. This is the whole perpetual foreigner stereotype. How do we, in a sense, confront this growing stereotype that's been a recurring problem, just now with the whole global pandemic, but throughout our history as AAPIs. And the best thing that we can do is just talk more. Don't If you have different things that other people are not used to or haven't seen before, don't try not to get offended by it. Just if people ask questions, take this as a chance to really showcase your own culture and who you really are, because it's a way for people to expand on their own knowledge and get a sense of that AAPI community. But for the people that are answering the question, it's like there's a sense of pride almost because you get the opportunity to showcase that other side of you. I know that for me, every time my friends ask me questions about different things that I do that are because of my Filipino background, I get so excited. I love to teach everybody that asks me questions about the Filipino culture, and I really just I I like being able to put more of my cultural side, out there into the world.
No, I like that. I mean, we all have a certain level of ignorance, and we're always working towards a new equilibrium, to learn more and more. And I
Yeah.
really admire how patient you are with that because sometimes it's really easy to just get, heated, because some people are like genuinely offensive. One of the weirdest things someone asked me once was, it was a coworker in high school. We were at a Dairy Queen, and he was like, "Have you ever had dog before?" And my
Oh
dumbass was
no.
like, I have two dogs. Because I
Really?
did, yeah, I didn't know. I was like, that's a weird way to ask, like, do you have dogs? But that's not what he was asking. He was like, Chinese people eat dogs. Have you ever had it? And I was like,
I would have made a joke
hell.
out of it. I would have been like, oh yeah, they're really good.
But he was like genuinely curious, and I was like, we don't do that. You need to like, I'm an American. You need
Yeah,
to
it's
chill.
okay. If it was like one of my friends that asked me, I would have been sarcastic. I would have thrown a little bit of sarcasm their
Yeah,
way.
we were
That's
not close enough to be
crazy.
like, I don't know.
He
I would
asked
be
you the
offensive. Yeah, I would be offended when my friends ask me that, honestly, because I'd be like, "You're my friend. You should know better." But
mm-hmm.
and then he'd be like, there was a in that Dairy Queen in the plaza, there was a Chinese takeout place, and he was like, there's rumors that like they sell dog, and I'm like, that's not
Oh
true.
no.
That's just not a thing. Like this is racist BS.
That is wow.
But yeah, so like that's part of the perpetual foreigner syndrome is that Asians in America, whether born here or not, will always be assumed as foreign, and
Mm-hmm.
because of such, you're treated differently. You're accepted as not American, and it throws you for a loop because you question yourself. Do I belong here? And to go back to your question, like, what can we do? We need to assert our place in American society. We need to tell more Asian American stories. We need to have more Asian American leaders and show that Asian Americans, we exist and we're here. We've made tremendous contributions to American society and will continue to do so. We're actually going to wrap up our discussion on the perpetual foreigner stereotype and move on to our next segment that's going to be a little more lighthearted.
Okay, welcome back, guys. So this next segment is going to be centered around something that I know brings everybody together, and that's food. So this segment is called Dish It Out, and the purpose of this is for Zach and I to share different dishes of the AAPI community. We have so many different cultures that are mixed together, and because of that, we have so many different delicious dishes that you know are popular, and then we also have those hidden gems that we don't really talk about. So, Zach, what did you bring to Dish It Out this week?
So this week I'm going to be talking about tasu bao or char siu bao or Chinese barbecue pork buns
Oh
or
my
just
goodness.
bao. There's a lot of names for it. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation a little bit, but that's okay. So basically, there are two main types: steamed and baked. Steamed baos have like a white fluffy outside bun, and inside there's a very hot and uh, fatty, sweet and savory pork filling. And so I feel like usually they're dyed red, and because you don't get that like natural red from just all the spices. But then the baked ones have a kind of a sweeter dough that with an egg wash, and they're equally amazing. So the steamed ones are usually in a dim sum setting, and the baked ones are in like a Chinese bakery setting. I love going to a Chinese bakery, and I've literally cleaned out their like bao stock before.
They're
Uh,
so good.
it they're so good. They're like dollar 20 now. They used to be cheaper, but you go to a Chinese bakery. This is experience. You get one of those white boxes from a Chinese bakery. You know what I'm talking
Yes.
about?
Yeah.
Yeah, anyone who's ever gotten something from like a lot of stuff from a Chinese bakery, like a cake, you know what I'm talking about. I've used $15 to just buy all of the baos they've had. You keep it in the fridge, you heat it up. They're just amazing. I don't know
It's
how to characterize them. They're not like
it's just
a
that balance of sweet and savory because you get the sweetness from the dough, and I'm just saying I love the steamed ones way more
really. I'm
than
more of a baked person.
okay, I was gonna ask you that question next because I personally love the steamed version of the pork buns because, going to the Asian supermarket, me and my family, we always get a box of four. And just biting into that sweet dough, like the sweet bread of like the bun, and immediately that savory, fatty pork just melts in your mouth.
Yeah.
There's, it's so good. I'm actually like, I'm craving it right now.
It's an experience. I miss it. I haven't had one in so long, and I need it back in my life. But no,
But
every time I've been to Philly for like we always had to stop in Chinatown to pick up some.
for the dish that I'm bringing to dish it out this week is a traditional finger food that's served in the Philippines. Everybody knows it, everybody loves it. I'm going to be talking about lumpia, which is a Filipino style egg roll. So I love this finger food. It's so easy to make and they're so small. They're about maybe an inch, inch and a half long. So I've been guilty of eating like 10 or 12 in one sitting. And because they're so small, I have zero guilt. But I think what I love most about lumpia is that this is such a good introductory food for all of my friends that want to learn more about Filipino food because you can really customize it in any way. So the traditional way is you fill it with ground pork and some vegetables. Like my family would put onions and um, different spices, and we would just fry it in regular vegetable oil. But so a little bit of backstory about me, I am with the Filipino Student Association at the University of Miami. And one of our biggest fundraisers during the school year is selling lumpia.
It's
And
my
because I know that a
favorite.
lot I know that a lot of people don't normally eat pork. So what we do is we take out the ground pork and we substitute it for ground turkey. And
Equally as delicious.
you still get that delicious that it's almost like, especially when you add the onions and the different spices, you still get that caramelized meat on the inside. And Zach, do you know that sound when you take a freshly baked loaf of bread and you squeeze it just a little bit and you get that crackle of the crust?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
There's just something about taking that bite from a freshly fried piece of lumpia and that crack when you bite into the crispy spring
Oh,
roll wrapper. There's just it's like music to my ears. That's the sound that I grew up with. Just and we would mix it with it's a finger food, so it's not a main dish. We would eat it with rice and other appetizers like barbecue chicken, different vegetables, and I just love that it complements any meal. You can eat it for lunch, dinner. I've had it for breakfast a couple times, like when we did leftovers, and it's just so it's so simple, but I can't believe that something so simple has such a powerful flavor that just
yeah.
it feels so good. Just like having a tray, like coming from the Filipino store, my parents they would come home with a tray of lumpia, and that's like the first thing that my sister and I would look for. They would come home from the Filipino supermarket, and my sister and I would run down the stairs to the kitchen, and the first thing we would ask is, "Did the Filipino store make lumpia this weekend? Did you bring home lumpia?"
Uh,
It's just well, I grew up with it. It's one of my favorite foods.
I'm jealous of how simple it is to make lumpia versus how simple, like how difficult it is to make bao.
Oh no. Yeah, lumpia is so it's honestly it's so simple. It's just because it's just basic ingredients, but it's you just
You wrap
and
it.
honestly
That's
you
the hard
can
part.
yeah, you just
Wrapping
wrap
is
it.
hard. Wrapping is
Wrapping
hard.
it and then frying it and keeping it intact. That's the only hard parts.
Yeah, like wrapping technique in Asian cuisine is just like a different level of difficulty. Because I know, like when I tried to make tasu bao, like the steamed ones, and you had to do that like circular crimp, that was so difficult. And when I steamed them, they kind of like fell apart.
Oh
It
no.
it's so hard. But then like you were talking about, like there's just a few ingredients in the inside. I
Hmm.
there's like over 10 different things that go in. There's like soy sauce, and you're like throwing in like all these different spices. You've got five spice. I'm really jealous on how easy it is.
But you know what? All of those ingredients in those pork buns make all the difference when you take that first bite and those flavors just melt in your mouth, like I said before.
Yeah,
It's worth all the work and all the ingredients.
100% though. Like
Yeah.
it took me 7 hours. But though that's one of the things though, is like the diversity of people in the AAPI community and of culture and of food is one of the most beautiful things and one of our greatest strengths, in the AAPI community. And
Oh,
I
for
think
sure.
that's part of how we assert our place in America is by sharing our food and getting people to love our food. That
Hmm.
that has to be part of the strategy.
Yeah. And to go off of that sharing foods, so the second part of Dish It Out, Zach and I just shared 2 dishes from our own cultures with all of you guys. But for next week, Zach and I are actually going to challenge each other to do some research about dishes from other cultures in the AAPI community and bring those to the Dish It Out table in the next episode. So, Zach, for next week, I want you to talk about onigiri. It's a traditional food item from Japan, and I've had it before. It's really good. I'm really excited to see what you come up with.
I've had it a couple times and it is amazing, and I'm really excited to learn more about it. I know that there's a little like farmers market stand at school at school that sells it.
Yes.
They're the best. And for M, I'm going to challenge you to look up gulab jamun. It's an Indian dish.
Hmm.
It's very sweet, also it's like a manually intensive, but definitely worth it.
Cool. I mean, I'm really excited to learn more about this dish. You said it was an Indian dessert?
I think it's a dessert, but I'm not really sure. It's just really sweet.
Okay, you said it's sweet, so my mind just automatically goes to dessert. But yeah, I think for now we're just gonna wrap up, Dish It Out.
If you've made it this far, thank you so much for joining us for our pilot episode in the SituAsian Room. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at the SituAsian Room and like us on Facebook. That's the SITU Asian Room.
Thank you to all of our friends from all over for your support and for helping us really set up this podcast and get it running. Whether it was you guys helping us promote our pilot or being in our commercial trailer, we really do appreciate all that you've done to help us. But now we want to hear from you guys. Send us messages on Instagram and Facebook, slide into our DMs, comment on our posts, send us messages. We want to know what you want us to talk about. So like we said in the beginning of this podcast, we want to make this more of a dialogue. And if you have certain topics that you want us to discuss, if you want us to talk about different current events or different segments, honestly, if you have certain dishes that you want us to bring to the Dish It Out table, let us know. We are always excited to hear from you guys, and any ways that we can make this podcast better, we are going to try and make that work.
Once again, my name is Zach Ng.
And I'm Emilie Villaverde, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. I hope it doesn't sound terrible.
Me too.